I still remember the day my world came crashing down. It was a cold morning in Atlanta, the kind that made the sky look gray and the air heavy. My husband, Marcus, had been sick for weeks. At first, we thought it was just exhaustion from his long hours at work. Marcus was the kind of man who would never complain, even when he was in pain. He always said, "Baby, I gotta keep pushing for you and the kids." But that morning, his body gave up. I had just served breakfast for the kids when I heard a heavy thud from the bedroom. My heart jumped out of my chest. I ran in and found him lying on the floor, struggling for breath, his lips trembling. I dropped to my knees, holding his hand, screaming his name. "Marcus! Stay with me, please. The kids need you. I need you." My voice cracked as tears blurred my vision. We rushed him to the hospital, but it was too late. The doctor came out after what felt like an endless hour and shook his head. "I'm sorry. He didn't make it." I felt the walls of my life crumble. My knees buckled, and I collapsed right there in the hallway. My children, 8-year-old Daniel and 5-year-old Kayla, looked up at me with wide, confused eyes. "Mommy, where's Daddy?" Kayla asked in her small, trembling voice. "How do you tell your babies that the man who carried them on his shoulders, the man who kissed them good night every evening, was gone forever?" The funeral was a blur. People came, dressed in black, whispering their condolences. Some hugged me, some avoided my eyes. I sat in the front pew, numb, staring at the coffin that held my husband. Inside that wooden box lay my best friend, my protector, my provider. Marcus's family was there too, his brothers and sisters, his mother with her sharp eyes that had never truly warmed to me. They cried, but their tears felt strange to me, almost rehearsed. His mother clutched her handkerchief, dabbing her eyes as she leaned on her oldest son. I couldn't shake the feeling that behind those tears was something else, a coldness I had seen before. After the burial, I tried to hold my children close and tell them that we would be okay. I told them that Daddy was in heaven, watching over us. But deep down, I didn't believe my own words. I didn't know how we would make it. Nights became torture. I would wake up in the middle of the night reaching for Marcus, only to touch an empty pillow. I would cry silently so the kids wouldn't hear me, but sometimes I failed. Daniel would come into my room, sit on the edge of the bed, and say, "Mom, please don't cry." Daddy wouldn't want you to cry. That only made me cry harder. Bills started piling up. Marcus had been the main breadwinner. I worked part-time at a small diner, but it wasn't enough to cover rent, utilities, and food. I thought maybe his family would step in, maybe they would help us through the storm. But I was wrong. One Sunday afternoon, about 2 weeks after the funeral, they came. His mother, his 2 sisters, and his older brother stood at my door. I invited them in, hoping they were there to offer support. But their faces were stern, their words colder than the winter air outside. "We've talked," his brother said, clearing his throat. "And we've decided that this house belongs to the family. You and the kids can't stay here anymore." I froze. "What? This is our home. Marcus and I built our life here. Where do you expect us to go?" His mother's voice was sharp, with no trace of sympathy. "Marcus was our son before he was your husband. You don't belong here anymore. Pack your things." It felt like someone had ripped the ground from under me. My children clung to my legs, crying, as they carried our things out and threw them onto the porch. Neighbors peeked through their curtains, watching as my late husband's family stripped us of dignity. That day, as I stood in the cold with 2 children and nowhere to go, I felt like my world had not just shattered, it had burned to ashes. The sound of my children crying on the porch that day still haunts me. Their little voices trembled as they begged, "Mommy, please, let's go inside." But there was no inside anymore. My late husband's family had made it clear we were no longer welcome in the home Marcus and I had built with sweat and love. Neighbors whispered from their windows, some shaking their heads in pity, others too afraid to get involved. One woman from down the street, Mrs. Carter, came out quietly and handed me a blanket. "I'm so sorry, baby," she said, her eyes heavy with sympathy. "You can't stay out here tonight. Come to my porch until you figure something out." I thanked her, but I knew I couldn't depend on neighbors for long. I needed to be strong for Daniel and Kayla. That night, we sat in the corner of Mrs. Carter's porch, the kids wrapped in the blanket, their heads on my lap. I stared into the dark sky and whispered, "God, why me? Haven't I suffered enough?" The next morning, I tried calling Marcus's brother, hoping he'd come to his senses. He picked up, but his voice was laced with disdain. "Look, girl, don't call me again. We did what we had to do. You'll survive. People like you always find a way." Then he hung up. People like me. Those words cut deep. I had always known they looked down on me. Marcus's family never thought I was good enough for him. His mother once told him right in front of me, "She ain't got much to offer you, Marcus. You deserve better." Marcus had stood by me, but I knew her words had lingered like a stain. With nowhere else to go, I walked to the diner where I worked and begged my boss, Mr. Johnson, for extra shifts. He frowned, rubbing his chin. "I can give you a few more hours, but I can't promise much. Business is slow." So I worked. I worked until my feet ached, until my back screamed. But still, it wasn't enough. Rent for a new place was impossible with what I was making. I scraped together enough to get a small motel room for a few nights, just so my kids wouldn't sleep outside. The room smelled of damp carpet and stale cigarettes, but at least there was a roof over our heads. Daniel tried to be brave. One night, as we lay in that cramped motel bed, he whispered, "Mom, don't worry. When I grow up, I'm gonna buy you a big house. Bigger than Grandma's." His little hand gripped mine tightly. Kayla nodded sleepily. "Me too, Mommy. I'll buy you 2 houses." Their innocence broke me. They didn't understand the cruelty of the world yet. I kissed their foreheads and promised, "One day, babies. One day, we'll have our own home again." But each day was a battle. Food became another challenge. I often skipped meals so the kids could eat. Some nights, my stomach growled so loud that Kayla would ask, "Mommy, aren't you hungry?" I'd smile and lie, "No, baby. Mommy ate earlier." The hardest part wasn't the hunger or the cold. It was the shame. Walking past the very street where my husband's family lived, knowing they had warmth, food, and comfort, while I had nothing. They passed me sometimes without a word, their heads held high, as if I was invisible. One afternoon, I gathered enough courage to confront Marcus's mother. I knocked on her door, clutching Kayla's hand. When she opened it, her eyes narrowed. "What are you doing here?" "Please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "The kids need stability. Can't we come back, at least for them? Marcus wouldn't want his children suffering like this." Her lips tightened. "Don't use my son's name to guilt me. You should have thought about this before marrying him. You're not part of this family anymore." And with that, she slammed the door in my face. That rejection cut me deeper than the cold nights, deeper than the hunger. It wasn't just about losing a house. It was about being stripped of dignity, of belonging. I walked away that day with a new fire in my heart. If they thought they had broken me, they were wrong. I whispered to myself, "I will rise. For my kids. For myself. And one day, they will see the woman they tried to destroy standing stronger than ever." Homelessness has a way of stripping you down to the bones. It doesn't just take your shelter. It eats away at your pride, your dignity, even your hope. For weeks, the kids and I bounced from one cheap motel to another, and when the money ran out, we found ourselves sleeping in the back of a bus station, trying to blend into the shadows. At night, I'd hold Daniel and Kayla close to me, my body shielding them from the chill of the concrete floor. I'd whisper stories into their ears, fairy tales about castles and kings, just to drown out the sound of rats scratching in the corners. They would fall asleep clutching my arms, while I stayed awake, staring into the dark, praying for morning to come fast. One night, Daniel stirred and looked at me with wide, scared eyes. "Mom, are we poor now?" he whispered. My heart clenched. I wanted to lie, to tell him this was just a short adventure. But the truth weighed too heavy on me. I kissed his forehead and said softly, "We may not have much right now, baby, but we're rich in love. That's what keeps us strong." He nodded, but I saw the doubt in his eyes. Kayla, being younger, didn't understand much. She would cry for her bed, her toys, her daddy. Sometimes she would point at strangers passing by and ask, "Mommy, is Daddy coming back with them?" Every time she asked, it was like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. Daytimes weren't easier. I'd drag the kids to the diner where I worked, begging my boss to let them sit in a corner booth while I served customers. Mr. Johnson wasn't heartless. He let them stay, but I could see the pity in his eyes. I hated pity. I hated the whispers from coworkers, the looks customers gave me when Kayla accidentally cried out for her daddy too loud. I swallowed my pride and started cleaning houses on the side, sometimes babysitting for strangers just to earn a few extra dollars. Every cent went to food for the kids. I often skipped meals, pretending I wasn't hungry, but some nights my body betrayed me. I would faint from exhaustion, waking up to Daniel shaking me, his little face panicked. "Mom, don't leave us two. Please wake up." It was in those moments that despair nearly broke me. Alone in the cold, rejected by family, struggling to keep my babies alive, I questioned God. Why did you take Marcus and leave me here to suffer? What sin did I commit that deserves this punishment? I cried those words into the night, but heaven stayed silent. Yet, despite the silence, I kept moving. Some mornings, when the sun hit Daniel's face just right, or when Kayla giggled at something silly, I felt a spark inside me. A reminder that I couldn't give up. They were my reason to fight. Then came the lowest point. One evening, after my shift, I returned to the bus station where we had been resting, only to find our few belongings, 2 bags of clothes and Kayla's stuffed bear, gone. Stolen. I fell to my knees, sobbing uncontrollably. Daniel knelt beside me, wrapping his little arms around me. "It's okay, Mom," he said, his voice trembling but steady. "We don't need things. We just need you." That moment broke me and healed me all at once. My son, only 8 years old, carried more strength than I did. His words lit a flame I didn't know I still had. That night, I swore to myself, I will not die in this valley. I will not let my children's story end in the streets. Something has to change. And when it does, I'll never look back. What I didn't know then was that change was closer than I imagined. A stranger, one I hadn't even noticed before, was about to step into my life and alter it forever. It happened on a Wednesday evening. I had just finished another long shift at the diner, my apron stained with grease and coffee, my body aching from endless hours on my feet. Daniel and Kayla sat in the corner booth, coloring on scraps of paper I had begged from the cashier. They looked so small, so fragile, yet they never once complained. As I was wiping down the last table, a man walked in. He wasn't flashy, not the kind of person who drew attention. But there was something calm and steady about him. He wore a simple button-down shirt, dark jeans, and carried a quiet confidence in the way he moved. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said politely, his voice deep but gentle. "Do you mind if I grab a coffee to go?" I forced a smile. "Of course. Have a seat, I'll bring it right over." When I brought him his coffee, he noticed Daniel and Kayla in the booth. Kayla had fallen asleep on her brother's lap, and Daniel was still drawing. The man's eyes softened. "Are those your kids?" "Yes," I said, suddenly embarrassed. "I know I shouldn't bring them here, but..." He raised a hand. No need to explain. I was just admiring them. They looked like strong kids. Strong. Nobody had ever used that word for my children before. People usually said, poor things, or bless their hearts. But never strong. The man introduced himself as David Mitchell. He was in his late 30s, a construction supervisor who had just moved to the area for work. He came by the diner a few more times that week, always polite, always asking about the kids. One night, after closing, I stepped outside with Daniel and Kayla, ready to walk them back to the bus station. David was parked nearby, sipping his coffee. He noticed me adjusting the blanket around the kids and frowned. "You walking this late at night with them?" he asked. I hesitated. Shame burned in my chest. "We don't exactly have a place right now." He didn't pity me. He didn't shake his head or sigh like others had. Instead, he said calmly, "That's not safe. Let me give you a ride at least." I wanted to refuse. Pride screamed at me not to accept charity. But when I looked at my babies, their tired eyes heavy with sleep, I swallowed my pride and nodded. That night, David drove us to the bus station. He didn't press for details, didn't judge, didn't ask why. He simply said, "If you ever need help, don't hesitate to ask." The next few weeks, he became a quiet presence in our lives. He'd stop by the diner, sometimes bringing small gifts for the kids, coloring books for Daniel, a doll for Kayla. He never made me feel ashamed. He treated me like a human being, not a burden. One evening, after my shift, he found me crying outside the diner. The motel manager had kicked us out because I couldn't pay for another night. I tried to hide my tears, but David stepped closer and asked gently, "Where are you taking the kids tonight?" I couldn't answer. My throat was too tight. "Come on," he said firmly, but not unkindly. "You're not sleeping on the streets with those babies. I have a spare room. You can stay until you figure something out." I hesitated, fear warring with desperation. I barely knew this man. What if he had bad intentions? But when I looked into his eyes, I saw no deceit, no danger, just sincerity. That night, for the first time in months, my children slept in warm beds. David gave us the spare room in his small apartment. The walls were plain, the furniture simple, but to us, it felt like paradise. Lying there in the dark, listening to my kids' peaceful breathing, I whispered a prayer of gratitude. For the first time since Marcus's death, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, God hadn't forgotten me after all. And maybe this man, David, was more than just a kind stranger. Maybe he was the beginning of something I never expected, a second chance at life. Moving into David's apartment was not part of my plan. At first, I told myself it was temporary, just a few days until I figured something out. But days turned into weeks, and those weeks began to feel like a lifeline I didn't want to let go of. David never treated us like a burden. He worked long hours at the construction site, yet he always came home with a smile and asked, "How was your day?" For the first time since Marcus's death, I felt like someone actually cared how I was doing. The kids adored him quickly. Daniel followed him around, fascinated by his tools and stories about building houses. "Mr. David, can you show me how to use a hammer?" he asked one Saturday morning. David chuckled, handing him a small piece of wood and a tiny hammer. "First rule, little man, respect the tool. Don't fight it, guide it." Kayla, on the other hand, saw him as her giant teddy bear. She'd climb onto his lap, braiding his short beard with her little fingers, making him laugh until tears rolled down his cheeks. Watching them together filled my heart with a strange mixture of gratitude and fear. Gratitude that my children were laughing again, fear because I didn't want to lose this newfound peace. One evening, as I cooked dinner in David's kitchen, a simple pot of spaghetti, I realized I was humming. I hadn't hummed in months. The sound startled me. David walked in, leaned against the counter, and smiled. "That's the first time I've heard you sing." I blushed, stirring the pot. "I guess I forgot I could." "You're finding yourself again," he said softly. His words lingered with me long after dinner. David never pushed me. He didn't demand I repay him, didn't make me feel like I owed him my soul for his kindness. Instead, he encouraged me. "You're stronger than you think," he told me one night after seeing me break down in tears over bills. "You've already survived what most people wouldn't." With his support, I picked up extra shifts, saved money, and eventually rented a small 2-bedroom apartment. It wasn't fancy, peeling paint on the walls, a squeaky floor, but it was ours. The day I held those keys in my hand, I cried like a baby. Daniel hugged me and shouted, "We have a home again." David was there, helping us move in. He carried boxes, fixed the broken lock on the door, and even bought Daniel a second-hand bike. When Kayla saw her own little bed, she twirled around the room, giggling, "This is mine. Just mine." Life slowly began to feel normal again. I enrolled Kayla in kindergarten and Daniel in a nearby school. I started budgeting carefully, cutting coupons, learning to stretch every dollar. It wasn't easy, but compared to the nights on the bus station floor, it felt like heaven. David and I grew closer, though I resisted at first. I still wore the wounds of betrayal from Marcus's family. Trusting someone new felt dangerous. One night, after dinner, David asked quietly, "Do you ever think about starting over? About loving again?" I froze, my fork halfway to my mouth. My heart wanted to shout yes, but fear wrapped around me like chains. "I don't know if I can," I whispered. He nodded, not pressing. "That's okay. I'll wait." Those 3 words undid me. I'll wait. Nobody had ever given me the gift of patience before. Months passed, and love crept in gently, like dawn breaking after a long night. Not the fiery passion of youth, but a steady, safe warmth. One evening, Daniel asked, "Mom, can we call Mr. David Dad one day?" My heart stuttered, and I glanced at David, who only smiled softly, his eyes shimmering with emotion. That was the moment I knew. This man wasn't just passing through. He was here for the long haul. Life has a way of turning tables. For years, I carried the sting of Marcus's family throwing me and my babies into the street, forcing us to suffer while they lived comfortably in my husband's house. I never thought I'd see the day when they would come to me with heads bowed, voices trembling. It was a Sunday afternoon. The kids and I had just come back from church, and David was helping Kayla set up her new dollhouse in the living room. Daniel sat on the floor, piecing together a puzzle, his brow furrowed in deep concentration. There was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I hesitated. When I opened it, my breath caught in my throat. Standing there were Marcus's mother and his oldest brother. They looked nothing like the proud, polished people who had once thrown my belongings onto the street. His mother's once neatly pressed dress was wrinkled, her face etched with deep worry lines. His brother's eyes darted nervously, and his shoulders sagged with defeat. For a long moment, none of us spoke. Finally, his mother whispered, "Can we come in?" Every instinct in me screamed to slam the door in their faces. Images of that day, the children crying, our things scattered in the dirt, flashed before my eyes. But then Daniel peeked around me, and Kayla tugged at my skirt, whispering, "Who is it, Mommy?" I stepped aside. Not for them, but for my children, who deserved to see grace in action. They sat on my couch, fidgeting, their eyes unable to meet mine. David stood silently in the corner, his presence solid and protective. Finally, Marcus's brother cleared his throat. We came to ask for forgiveness." His voice cracked, and for once, he didn't sound arrogant. His mother clasped her hands tightly. "We were wrong. When Marcus died, I let my grief turn into cruelty. I should have welcomed you, but instead I pushed you out. Now, Her voice broke. Now everything we had is gone. The house was taken by the bank. The business failed. We have nothing. The words hung in the air like smoke. I stared at them, my heart torn between anger and disbelief. Nothing, I repeated bitterly. That's how you left me and my children. Nothing. Tears welled in her eyes. I know, baby. I know. And I've been carrying that guilt every day. But pride kept me from coming sooner. My hands trembled. Memories of hunger, cold nights, Kayla asking for her daddy, everything came rushing back. Do you know what you put me through? Do you know how many nights my babies cried because of you? While you slept under warm blankets, we were begging God just to survive. They both wept silently. For the first time, I saw real shame in their faces. David placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. You don't have to carry their sins anymore, he whispered. I turned back to them. My heart, though scarred, had learned something through pain, that bitterness is a chain, and forgiveness is the only key. I forgive you, I said finally, my voice steady. Not because you deserve it, but because my soul can't live in anger anymore. Marcus's mother covered her face with her hands, sobbing. His brother muttered, "Thank you," his voice barely audible. But forgiveness didn't mean forgetting. I stood tall and added firmly, "But understand this, you will never again have the power to hurt me or my children. We have a new life now. We've built it with love, with resilience, and with God's grace. And that's something you can't take away." Daniel looked up at me with wide eyes, and I saw pride in his gaze. Kayla smiled, too young to understand the depth of the moment, but sensing the peace in my voice. As they left my home that day, shoulders hunched and heads bowed, I realized the tables had indeed turned. I was no longer the broken widow standing in the cold. I was a woman restored, surrounded by love, with a new future ahead of me. And for the first time in years, I felt free. After Marcus's family walked out of my apartment that day, I stood by the door for a long time, my hands pressed against the wood, my heart pounding. I wasn't trembling from anger anymore. This time it was from release. Years of bitterness and pain had clung to me like heavy chains, and in one moment of choice, I let them go. I turned around and saw David watching me. His eyes held a quiet pride, the kind of look that said, "You did it. You're stronger than even you realize." Daniel came up to me and hugged me tight, whispering, "Mom, you're the bravest person I know." Kayla, not understanding much, wrapped her tiny arms around my waist and giggled, "Mommy's happy now." And for the first time in so long, I truly was. Life with David settled into a rhythm. He didn't just love me, he loved my children as though they were his own. He showed up for every school event, cheered the loudest at Daniel's Little League games, and braided Kayla's hair with patience whenever I was too tired. He made our house a home, not with fancy things, but with laughter, safety, and consistency. One evening, sitting on the porch while the kids played in the yard, David reached for my hand. "I know life hasn't been kind to you," he said softly, "but I want you to know that as long as I'm here, you'll never be abandoned again." Tears filled my eyes, but they weren't tears of sorrow this time. They were tears of healing. I squeezed his hand and whispered, "I believe you." We eventually married in a small ceremony. No big church, no hundreds of guests, just close friends, the kids, and a pastor under the wide Georgia sky. When Daniel and Kayla stood beside us, smiling like sunshine, I knew this was more than a wedding. It was redemption. Of course, life wasn't perfect. Bills still came, challenges still rose, and sometimes the scars of the past ached like old wounds in the rain. But every time I looked at David, every time I heard my children's laughter in a home that belonged to us, I knew we had made it out of the valley. I learned something through it all. Strength isn't the absence of pain, it's the decision to keep moving through the pain. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's the courage to set yourself free. Marcus's family never fully rebuilt their lives. Occasionally, I'd see them around town, their pride humbled. We were polite but distant. I didn't hate them anymore, but I didn't let them back into the sacred space of my heart. That space was reserved for love, peace, and the future I was building. Years later, when Daniel graduated high school, I sat in the bleachers crying tears of joy. Kayla squeezed my hand and said, "See, Mommy? You made it. We made it." And she was right. I went from being a widow cast out with nothing to a mother who built her life again, brick by brick, with God's help, with love, and with resilience. My children no longer looked at me with fear. They looked at me with pride. When I tell my story now, I don't tell it as a tale of tragedy. I tell it as a testimony of how life can break you, yes, but also how it can mend you in unexpected ways. How strangers can become family. How forgiveness can become freedom. Standing in my living room today, watching David teach Daniel how to fix a leaky faucet and Kayla dancing around with her doll, I know one thing for certain. I am not the broken woman I once was. I am whole. I am strong. And I am finally free.